Welcome to the Alapra Podcast, the home for cultural chit chat in and outside Madrid. People will talk. Welcome to the Alapra Podcast. I tried doing this yesterday, but it felt a little bit weird for two reasons. Obviously, if you've been following the podcast, you know Mary has been taking a leave of absence. Glug glug, alcoholic problem, if you catch my drift. No, she's actually in Egypt for the next 3 weeks. So I'll be doing this solo on the whole podcast duties. Now, what I want to say really is that for the other episodes, going more story orientated, talking about stories and things that I like, and mostly reading them and letting them speak for themselves. But today I'm going to give it a lash anyway, talking on my own. And I decided to come outside because traditionally we do these things outside, well, also inside my gaff, but we do say in the description on the Twitter bio and the podcast bio that we bring you the sounds of Madrid, and this is certainly true. So I hope you're well, all our listeners, depending on how many are actually listening. My morning started really well. I'm currently walking around the streets of Lavapiés, which is my barrio, which is to say my neighborhood. I went to a cafe called Cafe Barbieri, which this is my third time being there. My first time was pretty cool. It was very nice. A friend of mine took me there, and then I went there a second time, and the waiters, as they can be sometimes in Madrid, can be a little bit rude. And then the third time I was left to my own devices, which I think is what I kind of prefer. And it was kind of a nicer experience. I was just on my own, had a tea, had some breakfast, and was reading a book, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in this podcast. It's going to be the frame around which I talk about other things. I think this second attempt and being outside, even there's people walking past and I'm talking on my own to my phone, is working. I feel kind of more confident about what I'm going to say. It's going to be more fluent, and I think it's going to be a better podcast for that. So what I'm actually looking at the moment, I mentioned Cafe Barbieri. I've moved a little bit, 2 minutes away from where that cafe is. I'm currently looking at another cafe which has an old style facade with the world map on it. And it's quite nice. This is a really nice street. There's not really much on it except for houses, but a lot of these narrow streets, you can tell this is an old part of Madrid. This is the old Jewish quarter, but also has a Muslim influence as well. And traditionally it's obviously been one of the oldest barrios in Madrid, but it's where a lot of houses were very old as well, and the current mayor has earmarked money for areas like this to be kind of renovated and to have more money coming into it. Also next to it is another cafe called Cafe Cultural, a big teatro and a pink neon sign, which I think you'll find is, well, if you are in Madrid, I would recommend it, because you go in there, it's definitely a place where you have to have a vibe. You know, you go in there, you read a book, or you work on something with your computer, and you have nice tea, and you have nice breakfast served on like kind of fancy dishes and everything, which is something I've noticed about Cork as well. Whenever I go back there for Christmas, or whenever I'm back there, there's just a plethora, a multitude of like really kind of hipster cafes and tea shops, and even though they're usually kind of expensive, there is like a decently good vibe there, good music, and you can just chill out there and read and write, and just kind of, if you like that kind of stuff, feel very happy in there, and also feel happy when you get out of there as well. So those those things in life are very valuable. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to read a short poem, which I've written myself. And to give you a bit of a background about it, it's January, if you're a teacher, is a bit of a weird time, because whenever there's like a natural break, such as Christmas or Easter, and you go and you come back, the coming back is a little bit weird. It does take you a while to kind of get back into the swing of things. I'm not really sure why that is. I think there's an underlying tension in being a teacher, in the sense that a lot of people who are teachers don't actually want to do it. And even though I do enjoy it, I would include myself in that. So when you are coming back into it, it's a bit daunting. And but by the same token as well, and this poem kind of reflects about this, is that when you're at home, you're walking around with nothing in your pants. In terms of like, you don't have your keys with you, you don't have your wallet because you just don't need them anymore, and you feel a little bit different. And it's a subtle thing, but it is, at least for me, it was a profound feeling of difference. It's the only way I can really describe it. And you know, obviously I'm walking streets here, but back home, and very often I don't get a chance to walk the streets. Obviously I leave the house and all that, but you know, you go in the car, you go down to the shop to do the Christmas shopping, and or you're meeting up with people, and either you get, you know, delivered to that bar, or they come to your place. And so it's very often you don't get a chance to kind of rediscover your own city, or town, because it's a very small town. And even just walking those streets at night time, again, I'm very susceptible to this. I fall prey to this kind of feeling very easily. It's not a sentimental feeling, and it's like a nostalgia. But I'm not really sure what I'm reacting to. I just know there's a strong feeling there, but I'm not really. If I'm trying to fix a thought on what that is, it's very difficult to do that, because I don't know what it is that's going through my mind. I just know what I'm feeling. And the interesting thing about nostalgia, if you're a fan of Mad Men, you'll see that at the end of season 1, he does a whole thing about it when he's doing the Kodak carousel ad campaign. So I'd recommend checking that out. But also as well, I read recently on The Economist magazine that people used to die from nostalgia, that in terms of the fact that it would be written on death certificates, and people thought it was a real cause of death, which I think is a very nice kind of understanding of it, and shows how our attitudes to certain words and concepts changes over time. And you know, things like heartbreak and nostalgia, which are kind of very painful things, they're things that we maybe don't experience in the same way anymore. And back then, people were more sensitive to their effects on people and their soul, you know, and their heart, and how they're feeling and everything. So I think that's a very, very important thing to be aware of. But I'll read this poem. We'll see what you think, and then we'll take it as a launch pad from there. Okay, so this poem is called Turn. My pockets are full with being empty. The golden key sits atop a row of books, while the keyrings compete with jacket sleeves for relevance. My wallet reposes with papery skin, creaking like that of a lizard, carved by the elements, ridges, edges, folds of a life, divested of its contents, pools of coins and notes clinging like ties, pouring forth across credit card holders, over the thin lips and tongues, dry 50s, somber 10s, to the hanger-on Yaveros, the shelved ideas. My legs take more than a minute to adjust to the redefinition posed by my trousers. 2 weeks a year, I am the nowhere man. The town hasn't changed in 200 years. Pictures from this book, local history, like the parish priest or that one neighbour that was old when you were young and is still old, with purple hair, boiled sweets. Her kitchen is where you learnt the word linoleum. Is nice, full of the kindest phrases. Big Tom is looking well, and the shop has been in the family for years. Tinker is vomiting and shouting. There's a green bottle of hardened statue, 49 of imported piss, airbrushed from pages, picked up by high-vis men on their rounds. 2 weeks a year I do my own rounds, and I reacquaint myself with hazy figures, and all the best ones with backs covered by luminous jackets, shovels at hand, sorting the past. Okay, so that's the poem, which kind of fleshes out a little bit what I just introduced there. I was also partly inspired because when I was at home for Christmas, I received a book which was written by local historians. It's basically a collection of pictures and receipts from my town in West Limerick, and like the statements go back hundreds of years even, and the pictures go back to, you know, even the same length of time as well. And as mentioned in the poem, the town hasn't changed, which provokes a strange kind of kind of bittersweetness or a kind of duality of thinking, which is to say that on one hand you think, wow, what a shithole, this has not changed one bit, but also as well it can kind of connect you more firmly to the past, and I kind of felt a renewed appreciation for my town, which I've been feeling anyway, because when you remove yourself with time and you come back to something familiar, it has that kind of effect on you. And what else do I want to say about this? Well, basically, the town. You look at pictures from the 1920s of the bridge, for example, and it's the same as it is today. You can see old men sitting on it, and now you don't see old men sitting on it anymore because, well, the ways of entertaining oneself and filling your free time have changed, of course. But I remember as well being a kid and seeing old people sitting on walls, and because they know where else to go, and this is what you do. So there's a recognition there as well. Also, I found a trace of my own family history because my great-grandfather on my mother's side was a plasterer, and he was a big deal, apparently, one of the biggest employers in the area, and people believed he had been to Italy because he was known to keep a clove of garlic in his pocket and take it out and chew it as a treat. And this is a very Italian thing to do, apparently. And he was very famous for the molds that he did, so he was able to kind of plaster things really beautifully until people started copying those designs, and he lost a lot of business. So that's the end of that. That's the end of that story for him, anyway. Just walking past another kind of disused building that's not even in use, but you've all these kind of artistic posters outside. Jesus, I've been here for like over a year. There's still things I'm discovering about this neighborhood. As you can probably tell, I'm walking around. But the thing about these thoughts and these feelings is like that. Obviously, a lot of these things are very prosaic if you articulate them. These kind of deep truths, as they were, because they sound as very simple and very straightforward. But it's like, if you think of the person that maybe you are in love with or have loved, then you will say, well, I love him or her because they're great or whatever. And it's just a list of adjectives. It has no meaning really except for what you feel about it. And it's the same with this, because I always feel that the past is distant, and people say that the past is another country. And I think I'm guilty of that. I think I'm guilty of treating people from the past as strangers, as foreigners, as shadows that aren't almost real or very different from me, which is ironic because I am a historian by trade, so I shouldn't really be doing that. But when you see these pictures, then it just brings everything into more clarity for you, and it kind of makes things seem, more relatable, which is what history is about, which is what books are about as well. So that's kind of nice. It's a nice feeling to experience that. Because also when I was back in Cork, I met a friend of mine and we went to the Nano Nagle Centre in Cork. So if you're ever in Cork, this is I think it's been redeveloped. It's only been open for a while. It was very quiet when we went in there. But you can kind of just go in there and see the life of this woman who set up loads of poor houses for children. And she felt very deeply about their education and their welfare, which is obviously a very nice gesture, and she did lots of great things. But the thing that struck me was that at the end of the museum tour, you can see a video. Sorry, someone just walking past there, so felt a bit self-conscious talking to myself about this shite. But anyway, so yeah, you can see a video about from the 60s. It's a BBC show from 1966, charting the entry of an 18-year-old girl from Cork, I think, going into a nunnery and into a convent. And it was amazing because, as I said, you see these people, well, I do at least anyway, as distant. And her father, who was like, okay, he's 1966, he's probably in his 50s or 60s, so he's a mentality of like maybe from the 40s or 50s. He is crying because his daughter's going into this convent. He doesn't want her to do it, or he's going to miss her because he thinks he's not going to see her as much. Now, when she was entering, the rules had changed a few years before, where you could actually have visitors and leave it. So, it wasn't as if they were never going to see her again, but her life was going to change very markedly. And then they spoke with her brother. Now, he had no age given to him in the documentary, but he seemed to be like in his early 20s, and he was like saying, when I heard the news, it was very sad because, she's like a nice girl, she liked going out and everything, and then, she had friends and she liked laughing, and he knew like her life was going to change in a big way, and he seemed like just a very modern person, because you think of Ireland in the 60s, a lot of people are going to think it's just very pious and very and one final thing I just want to say about that book is that there's one street called Bridge Street, which was popularly known as, I can't believe this, I can't even remember the fucking name that it got changed to colloquially, some animals anyway, but it's just a callback to a previous podcast where the British, obviously, when they translated words in Irish, sometimes they got it wrong. They misinterpreted the Irish word, and they thought it was the name of an animal, and that's why it became popularly known as that animal street. I can't remember the animal, but you get the idea anyway. So just even seeing things like that, something that we mentioned in Brian Frieda's Translations, which is quite a popular podcast, judging by the analytics, and also the idea of our town being kind of swept up into a wider history, which wasn't always the case, or not so obvious, because there is a commemoration to the fighters of the old IRA who fought for the independence in 1919 to 1921. So if you're not familiar with Irish history, whatever feelings you have about the current incarnation of that group, the old IRA were a sound bunch of lads anyway, and did a lot of good things for the country, but the monument took a few years to build, and it's just kind of the town being linked to something kind of bigger than itself, but also kind of going at a snail's pace. You can see the local history and the modern aspect to it as well. There's also a picture of Michael Collins, who was inspecting troops in the town square, and I have another book about him called Michael Collins in Pictures, and there's also another picture of him in Newcastle West. So basically this was the last tour he made before he got assassinated in Bailing of Law down in Cork. So he's passing through certain towns, obviously passed through my one, and so it's one of the few remaining, or one of the photographs that catalogued him in the kind of the closing phases of his life. So there's a bittersweet quality to that as well. So now I just want to finish off the last parts by talking about a book by Laurie Lee, which is about the 4 seasons of the English life in winter, spring, summer, and autumn. I haven't even finished it. I'm just starting spring, so it's the second part of the book. But I think he's a fascinating character. He's an English poet and writer who fought in the Spanish Civil War, suffered some of the same ignominies as George Orwell, with the Soviets and the Russians, when they entered the conflict in a more real sense, accusing him of treachery, and he eventually escaped with his life and travelled around the world a little bit. His interesting tales of living in Spain and being so poor, all they ate was pasta, and they burnt the furniture for fuel. And he had the typical story as well of the international brigadier falling in love with a local woman, and also he charts in one of his books the kind of absurdity of the preparations, and how outgunned, outmatched, and how outtrained they were by Franco's forces. So that book is very interesting to read. But this other book is more specifically about like English life, and it kind of goes back and forward in time, and full of interesting observations. But one of the early chapters talks about the games he used to play as a wee lad, playing conkers and stealing apples from orchards, and these kind of games that kids played on the streets when there's no cars, save for wheelbarrows and horses and carts. Now, I think it's an interesting thing as well, because I'm not going to say to you that I was part of the generation that did that stole apples from orchards and played with conkers, but we were aware of it, because obviously it was our parents' generation and the grandparents' generation, so it's still like a living thing, if not more than if more than a memory, but if not quite present as well. And also, sometimes, like, I used to read the Just William books, which were books my father used to read when he was a kid, which described those kind of games in great detail as well. And but we still did some of those things. We were out in the fields, as it were. We did play with Conkers actually, and did some of those games as well. So I felt like, the things that he's describing. Yeah, I'm like, our generation were almost the last maybe to experience it, because now kids growing up are not going to be doing those things, and so like I think our generation is a peculiar thing where we're a bridge between maybe two generations before us and the previous generation to ours, and the next one, which I think if you're a kid born now, maybe you have the same feeling. I don't know, but we kind of occupy maybe perhaps a peculiar place in the transition of time from one generation to the next, and also he just talks. I mean, because obviously we mentioned in a previous podcast as well about the medieval poetry, how interesting it was, and how it like harked back to nature. And this book is full of nature as well, and the personal significance of interacting with it, which again is something that we don't really have anymore. And this seems like such a profound connection that he has between himself and the place that he knows and calls home, which. And so you have wonderful observations, because he was quite a sickly child, and the chapter that finishes with, and now as I write this, I have a split iris, but I can still check out landscapes and the things that I enjoy seeing, basically. So just finding the beauty around you. And if you listen to the Blind Boy Rubber Bandits podcast, there's a lot about that, being mindful and kind of just living in the present. And for more detailed description of that, I'd recommend checking out his podcast more than listening to my one about this currently. In the moment, I can hear a bird in the background. I'm not sure if my podcast is upsetting him, or maybe it's a person, who knows. So as the life of the city goes on behind us, the final point I'll say about that book is that, I guess I haven't finished it, but there's a chapter where he talks about like bringing his new wife to Spain, and how like he had to, they tried for ages to have a kid, but it was only when they went back to the valley where he hadn't left until he was 18, that they were able to conceive. And it was like, he said something interesting about, it's like I had to come home to get the kid, which I think is, it's probably truer than he probably realizes it, because it's probably a poetic flourish, but psychologically I think he needed to be in a place where he felt home and happy and comfortable before something as natural as that could happen. And he's a man who's very in tune with his inspiration, I think, and he makes the point as well that he has a theory that perhaps a healthy, strong man, which he wasn't, won't be able to write, because it's when you are in a sickly state that you have to resort to living in another world. Now, I don't know how true that is, but it's his observation, it's his opinion, and it's true for him, which is good enough for me, even if it might not be true for me, or maybe it is. I need to think more about that particular issue. But this is it. This is the end of the podcast. Thank you very much for bearing with me and listening to me rant in a very unstructured way. A real flow of ideas based on what I've been thinking about, and kind of what I've been reading as well. So don't worry, in a couple of weeks normal service will resume with the podcasts. We'll have the duo back together, the old band back together, so a conversation based thing. For the other podcast episodes, I'm probably just going to read stuff like a story or something, so just kind of add more episodes to the story time part of the podcast. Also as well, you can find us on Patreon now. It's a new thing that we've done, where you can subscribe to us. Well, not be subscribed, but you can be a patron of us and give us money if you want, if you like what we're doing and want to support us, because it'd be great to make a bit of money from this, because it's something we want to do long term and in a kind of like a professional way. So if it's like 10 cent, €2, €10, 10 million, whatever it is that you want to do, it would be greatly appreciated, and we'll give you a shout out on the podcast if you do it. And if that humble reward doesn't swing it, I don't know what will. So that's it. So this is me saying bye-bye to the podcast. Keep checking us out. LARPA1 on Twitter, LARPAmedia.com, the website, LARPA on YouTube, and as I said, LARPA Media on Patreon. Give us a look, give us a like, and give us a subscribe. Thank you very, very much.